If we know the machines are going to be taking over a lot of these jobs and becoming the main economic agents in the world, why not have a stake in the machines themselves?
Why does ownership matter?
I think it just comes down to freedom. We'll be fully dependent on whatever big tech companies states, and we're no longer going to be able to do what we want to do or have our own say in at the end of the day.
Robotic labor, I don't know what you want to call them, but whatever it is, we need to have universal ownership of those things.
XMAQUINA, its mission is to make physical AI accessible to a global community, give them direct exposure to the rise of robotics, physical AI, and you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. And I think our jobs are being replaced by machines that are doing it just more effectively and more efficiently. We've just become fully dependent.
I'm really scared that we will get to a stage where inequality will become crazy high.
We as people need to push for that alternative, right? Rather than the centralized ones.
Welcome to We Are DePIN, a podcast focused on the world of DePIN projects. Each episode, we invite projects to discuss how they are revolutionizing the world of DePIN and Web3. Our goal is to keep you informed about everything happening in the DePIN space through insightful discussions. This podcast is brought to you by Minima, the embedded blockchain. Minima is a fully decentralized layer 1 blockchain that can embed and run a full node on edge devices. Minima is not just another blockchain. It's a fundamental shift in how decentralized networks can operate. Its lightweight architecture allows it to run a full node on chip on any mobile or IoT device, making it exceptionally adaptable to scaling any decentralized physical infrastructure networks. Minima's technology is now being supported by an expansive and engaged community of over 50,000 node operators. So join us for this next insightful discussion and enjoy the episode.
Hey Mauricio, how are you?
Hey, Sina. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to the podcast today.
Very excited to have you on. We did a space a while ago talking about DePay, decentralized physical AI, and we had Mazzari on the space. And this is a really fast emerging strand, I guess, of DePIN and combining it with AI. It's very exciting. And that's why I'm really excited to have you on. I think you guys are actually our very first DePay guest. I mean, one of many. I'm sure we'll get a lot more coming forward. So before we jump in, give me an overview of what XMAQUINA is.
Yeah, for sure. That was a fun space, first of all. This space is really exploding over the last few months. I think a lot of interesting projects are popping out and a lot of real world issues are being fixed with DePi, and it's exciting to see. XMAQUINA is essentially, its mission is to make physical AI accessible to a global community, give them direct exposure to the rise of robotics, physical AI, and provide the infrastructure for builders to fund, launch, and co-govern this next generation or this next technological revolution. So that's the main vision for the DAO and the ecosystem that we're building. And we're doing this by essentially allowing people to access a lot of these leading robotic startups. A lot of access to these companies have been very limited. So unless you're an accredited investor, it's very hard to get any exposure to this whole vertical, which is really going to see explosive growth over the coming years. And we do this by uniting a global community to basically pool resources, acquire stakes in these companies. Not only that, but also deploy revenue generating machines or systems. And contribute to early stage DePi and DePIN protocols, kind of fueling the decentralized machine economy and basically govern it by its members.
Very cool. Is it more of a connection and an ecosystem project? Like, dig a bit deeper into your answer.
Yeah, so it's built with like two core pillars. So we have the machine economy DAO, which essentially governs this multi-asset treasury. Allocates capital to robotics, DePIN, physical AI, machine RWAs, etc. And then we have the Launchpad, which allows people to leverage our legal framework, our technical infrastructure, and as well as our fundraising platform, or Genesis auction dashboard that we've built, to essentially issue sub-DAOs, which by default are it's a legal wrapper for that asset. Co-own these different types of assets, raise capital, and allow to govern these real world projects. So I could maybe go into an example so it's not so abstract. Let's say you have you're a vertical farm company, right? And you're scaling. You could use this launchpad to tokenize an asset and basically fractionalize the ownership, or a community can even come together and purchase it. You're seeing a lot of really cool, innovative business models coming out with this emerging machine economy, right? An example is a partner of us, iFarm. They provide the software, the hardware, and for a subscription, you can actually manage operations. And this is how they've managed to become one of the bigger vertical farm operators worldwide. So, for example, you could come together as a community, crowdfund to tokenize, let's say, a strawberry vertical farm in the UAE, which is producing um, basically like organic premium strawberries somewhere where it's really not possible to grow that, and create a business out of it and fractionalize the ownership, right? So on chain, you're essentially fractionalizing that and having ownership through an asset token. And then you're governing that asset as a collective. So you tokenize the SPV and essentially can govern what you do with the revenue. If you want to grow the farm further, if you want to distribute revenues and so on. So it's essentially allowing people to just leverage our entire stack to be able to, yeah, really kick off this machine economy in a democratic and co-owned way, where it's not just the big enterprises that they're having ownership of all of these economic agents that are going to come into our life over the coming years.
That sounds very cool. And I guess like really digging deeper into what's the core problem that you guys are solving, because from what it sounds like, one of the sort of, I guess, bottlenecks when it comes to DePIN and DPay innovation and adoption is just basically collaboration with other projects. What's the sort of key problem that you guys are solving?
Yeah, so the problem that so a bit of background about myself. I was actually leading the ecosystem team, the head of growth at Peak Network. So they're building the infrastructure layer for the machine economy. And and we realized while I was there that autonomous machines are going to become capital, but ownership isn't really accessible. And even the companies building in this field, it's very high capex to scale into new jurisdictions and new places. So we saw the opportunity for Web3, like the infrastructure, to be able to fractionalize this asset, govern it, and then democratize the ownership, right? And this all stemmed from this idea of universal basic ownership. So, like obviously we all know universal basic income, but then we can become very dependent on whoever is providing that income, whether it's a state or a company or a startup or whatever it may be. We had this idea of like universal basic ownership, right? So why don't you just own, if we know the machines are going to basically be taking over a lot of these jobs and becoming the main economic agents in the world, why not have a stake in the machines themselves and have ownership rather than, dependency? And then that's kind of is the problem that we were set up to solve from the start. And I think it's a good way for us to move forward into this age of automation.
Yeah, it's a funny one. I think we're getting maybe into the philosophical part of, I guess, AI and DePIN and machines potentially replacing people. Very, very basic question, and I know this sounds pretty basic, but I would love to get an answer from your side, Mauricio. But why does ownership matter in this sort of revolution, where if we do assume that robots will take over and that the growth is exponential, they'll become exponentially more powerful and exponentially more sort of, the adoption will be exponential. So why is it so crucial, and why is it crucial right now?
Um, I think, yeah, this is a very big question, but it kind of ties back to one of the April Fool's tweet that Minima made about being acquired by the WEF. You know, you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. And I think it all ties back to that, right? If we don't own anything, our labor or our jobs are being replaced by machines that are doing it just more effectively and more efficiently. Um, we're just become fully dependent. It just comes back to that, right? We'll be fully dependent on whatever big tech companies or entities, states call the shots, and we're no longer going to be able to do what we want to do or have our own say in at the end of the day. I feel like we'll just have to basically go by the mandate, and I think it just comes down to freedom. What would you say? I interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with you. And the way that I think about it is, okay, if we do assume that AI will take over sort of people's roles and jobs, people's at the moment, people who don't own assets, their biggest asset that they own is their labor, and that's what they exchange for money, and then they buy goods and services with that. The reason why people are so scared of AI, and then if you combine robotics with AI together, and then you use a deep in sort of I guess system and network for them to transfer value, that becomes even more scarier to people, because they're like, well, they're replacing me and the biggest asset that I own, which is my labor. I think what's really scary to people is that they feel like they'll go into sort of the poverty line, because they won't have a way of sort of, they'll have no capital, they'll have no assets, and they'll have no labor, because it won't be as valuable as a robot, because they can work 24 hours a day, they're more efficient, XYZ. So the reason why I think ownership is so important is because over time, over many years, one company will own one robot, and then they'll own two robots, and then they'll own 100 robots, and then they'll own 1,000. And you'll see over time that all the capital in the world will be owned by one or two or three different companies across the world. And as the innovation becomes more exponentially powerful, those handful of companies will become exponentially powerful, and then those companies will buy other smaller companies, and it will get to a stage where I know this sounds very, very Mad Max, or because it's strange, because people think that if the world becomes more efficient and more productive, which is the direction it's going in, surely everyone will benefit, because you'll get to a situation where we can harvest crops more efficiently, we can travel more efficiently, we can do all these things more efficiently, and input will be more productive. But at the same time, the rewards of that will not go to individuals, it will go to the companies. So I'm really scared that we will get to a stage where inequality will become crazy high, just because of this wave. And I think now is the perfect and only time to act, because the wave is already happening, and this will happen very fast, the next waves. So I completely agree. I think ownership is absolutely paramount. I don't think people are thinking or talking about it. Basic universal income makes sense to me, but I think an extension of that, which is equally, if not more important, is universal ownership of these things that will, I don't know whether you want to call them assets or robotic labor, I don't know what you want to call them, but whatever it is, that we need to have universal ownership of those things.
Yeah, I completely agree. And you're also seeing that a lot of this value is being generated in private markets as well. So like there really is no chance for like your everyday person to be able to participate, right? Like if you're seeing the rise of humanoids and all these robots, like let's say Aptronic, for example, or Figure AI, these companies that are building technology, who have essentially contracts with Mercedes and big
Mm.
Amazon, like the biggest companies in the world, to automate their entire processes. And there's no access for retail to be able to like really benefit from this growth. It's all being concentrated, and this will happen through the private markets and then in the deployment of the machines as well. But I'm quite optimistic, because you're seeing different types of companies with innovative business models pop up as well. For example, I've seen this other company, iFarm was an example, but I've seen this other company based out of Germany who's doing autonomous vehicle fleets, right? So they're preparing for that. And essentially, they're also going to have this subscription model where you could purchase an autonomous vehicle, and then you're paying a subscription to kind of add your asset to their fleet, so then they can expand really quickly. So think of like Uber, right? But it's all autonomous vehicles, and it's not really, instead of you being a driver, you can contribute your vehicle, your autonomous vehicle, to the network, and you're earning revenue
Mm.
like that. So I think there's ways we could still find business models that we could create and develop and basically uh, uh, but we as people need to push for that alternative,
Mm.
right, rather than the centralized ones.
But my pushback to your answer is I think the whole autonomous vehicle model where so you and I, if we own an autonomous vehicle, we don't use it during the night, but then people might use it in the Uber model, and we would earn rewards for that. My pushback there is if one individual owns one vehicle and they rent it out more, you could say, than the next person, they're earning more income, which allows them to buy a second car. That those two cars become four, and over time you will still get monopolization, but you owning one car, you won't because say you use it more yourself, maybe you have kids, maybe you have to use it more, you won't earn as much money. So say if that's your only asset that you own, and as we sort of alluded to before, your labor is less valuable than a robotic, labor. Um, that's the sort of apprehension I have, because surely that other individual which is renting out their car more often than you are, they'll earn more money, and so they can just buy a second or third or fourth, and you sort of again their wealth grows exponentially, whereas you can barely like keep one. So I don't know what the model is here that fixes it, which is why I'm liking with you guys. You guys are already pushing those discussion points out there, and you guys are already sort of discussing ownership. And the question I would love to ask you, then, Mauricio, is like, what is the biggest challenge when it comes to this?
Yeah, I think since it's so early, the biggest challenge is like the legal frameworks to make this all um, work globally. So there's no standardized frameworks for all of this yet. So we spent a lot of our time at XMAQUINA working on our legal framework, actually. So it took like 8 to 10 months um, to kind of create this sub DAO model, this really decentralized framework. So the key to making this function was to make it decentralized, right? Because then you kind of removing the definition of security that you invest into something with expectation of gains and somebody else is doing all the work. If you really decentralize it and it's all governed and people are making the decisions along the way and the team is kind of being pulled away, it's just kind of created the infrastructure, put it out. You can maybe manage operations and handle certain things, but it's not really the key decision makers or the driver between the protocol and the ecosystem. That was the main thing. After speaking with our lawyers, we're working with a really good law firm called RM Law, and they have a subsector called DAObox, which is basically just um, the subsector who just focuses on legal frameworks, wrappers, and governance frameworks for DAOs. So yeah, essentially we spent a lot of time working there in ways that we could make all of this work, and the answer was decentralization. But there is still no. It could get a lot more interesting once we have legal clarity on a lot of things, right? So, for example, imagine, and we are working on frameworks with Peak and partners in certain jurisdictions. Can't disclose all the details yet, but this is where it gets really exciting, right? Imagine you own $10,000 in a vertical farm, right? Maybe it's in the UAE. Let's use that example we used in the past. Generating like normal yields, right? It's not crypto yields, maybe 10% APY, something like that. So you're earning a little bit of your stake in that vertical farm per year. Imagine you can use that same asset, like take that asset right now as it stands. It's kind of a non-transferable asset. You can't then take it liquid, trade it publicly, and then be able to use it in DeFi, for example. It's quite limited. So it's kind of just remains in your wallet. You have the asset, but it doesn't really unleash the full potential of Web3 and DeFi. Imagine there's a framework now, a real RWA framework, where you can take that asset, your 10K in vertical farm, it's a stable asset, so you would only take into account the depreciation of the asset over the time, but it's pretty stable, right? You could put it into a DeFi protocol, borrowing and lending protocol, and borrow, let's say, 7K of the 10K, and then still have that capital at your disposal, that liquid capital, but have that asset generating your yield at the same time. This is when machine DeFi becomes really powerful and kind of solves some of the problems that we were talking about. Like, what if this person only has one car and they're not using it as much? That kind of helps, right? So you're fractionalizing the asset. You can own just a part of it. You don't have to buy the full asset yourself. That's one thing. Another thing is this compounding effect and being able to borrow and lend against those machine assets, kind of just boosting the growth and scalability of the machine economy. So these are all things that we're looking at. Obviously, we're not quite there yet. It needs a few years to develop, build the infrastructure, make sure these legal frameworks are in place. But it's all really, really interesting space that we love to be in. And I think it's the future, even though it takes time and we need to work with regulators, jurisdictions to kind of make it all happen. But I think it's going to be the future of the machine economy.
When you say legislation, what's the biggest challenge there? So is it like cross-border legislation when it comes to ownership of assets? Like what do you mean by legislation specifically?
Yeah, so there's no like global RWA frameworks and basically telling you what is a security and what's not, what can be tokenized, fractionalized, how can you distribute in a compliant way, can this token be liquid? So like there's a lot of gray areas still where we have to operate in. And I think as soon as these things are clarified, there'll be a lot more growth in the industry. But it seems I'm quite optimistic on this front as well, since I mean what we're seeing with the US and how they basically 180 on their stance on crypto. And I think now a lot of clarity is coming. So it's time to work with these states and these different regulators to kind of set frameworks that make sense and also be accountable, right? We don't want to just have a free for all. We want to have like clear set guidelines and rules that we could abide to and build on, and then we'll have a legitimate industry solving real world problems instead of just all this gray area stuff where we can't really fully innovate at the speed that we could be just because of the blockers.
Mauricio, I want to talk about your ecosystem a bit more, and I guess like specific use case examples. What's one that you guys have right now that you can talk about in terms of just so people can visualize it a bit more? So the specific industry, what was happening before, how you guys came in, changed it with your DAO, with your token structure, and the state of it currently.
Yeah, I guess an example that we could talk about is like a demo that we had. We actually had a demo at Token 2049 last year in Dubai. And essentially we showed how service robotics could be fractionalized and then the revenues could be distributed. So we showed this in a demo. We're actually using the Crest network and so on. So people would come to a robo cafe. So it's basically a fully autonomous barista, can make ice cream and coffee. And it was essentially just a robotic arm providing all the guests coffee and ice cream, right?
I think I use it.
Yeah, you might have been there. Yeah, we were at the peak booth. So we were showcasing, people would come in, we were giving away the asset token for free just to show it as a demo, but essentially people could own a stake. So they would come, they'd claim a stake just for visiting the booth. It was normally you would purchase or like invest into the asset, etc. And then when people came and bought ice cream, it was or coffee, whatever it was basically on chain. We were fetching all the data from the POS system, showing it on chain, all the transactions that were coming in, everything that was being generated. So the data was being basically verified to the payment gateway. And then we were distributing equally on chain. So that was the payment was coming on there. We had a fiat on ramp, off ramp. We work with partners at Stripe. Company that got acquired by Stripe called Bridge.xyz. And essentially they enable this whole fiat on ramp and off ramp. It's essentially a machine on ramp, which is really cool. So the revenue generated from the machine is sitting in the Stripe account, and that could just execute a simple transaction to an IBAN on Bridge.xyz. And that is basically with APIs connected to the smart contract, has all this logic, etc. And the fiat, whether it's dollars, euros, whatever it might be, it's automatically converted into stable coins and then sent to the smart contract for distribution. And then all gets done in like a peer-to-peer or like permissionless manner, a decentralized manner without us ever having to be custodians or there being a third party involved. So that's a good example that we actually did at a demo. So there's a article and so on. You can read into it as well. But yeah, that's kind of a use case.
That's very cool. So theoretically, I guess like the cafe example, perhaps. So say if you scaled that up from like one sort of robotic agent to say like 3 or 4, so you could basically build a whole sort of 24-hour cafe. You could use the DAO setup that you guys have for people to inject the initial capital to buy these robots, and then any sort of revenue that's generated can be distributed amongst all the sort of initial DAO participants, as a reward, basically for taking part.
Yeah, so the bigger DAO is a bit different. Like the main DAO, the XMAQUINA DAO, is more like it's a bigger vehicle, so would it be like asset specific? Because then we're owning
Oh, I
different types of
see.
machine. We may own that vertical farm, the Robo Cafe. Maybe we have some equity in Aptronic, for example. Maybe we're investing into the GPU chips for humanoids or the OS systems, operating systems, and so we have all these different physical AI assets that are just inaccessible. So we're creating this like proxy for like physical AI. Could also be Web3 protocols or DeFi protocols that are kind of so that it's not just the main DAO that would be directly tied to that asset, but this is where the machine economy launchpad that I spoke about kind of comes in.
Oh, okay.
This it allows people to issue sub DAOs. So it goes through governance. Like we still, as Davis holders, would have to approve a sub DAO. It goes through due diligence process, etc. But if it does get approved, then they could do exactly that, right? They could create a sub DAO. Somebody could create a sub DAO to tokenize, let's say, 7 of these robo cafes across, I don't know, New York, right?
Mm.
People could pool the capital, essentially fractionalizing the asset, and then deploy it. You do need an operator, right? So usually you'd be working with the manufacturer or the operator that's already doing it, and so on. Um, Usually with their subscription models, or maybe themselves are actually using the launchpad themselves to kind of scale their operations there. But yeah, then essentially you could fractionalize that specific asset or fleet of assets, and be able to kind of govern how what you do with that revenue. Maybe you guys decide to as a DAO, people could vote. Nah, we've generated, I don't know, $10,000 more, $20,000. Let's use that to purchase another one. You kind of can decide. It becomes
Mm.
its own DAO, own assets, own liabilities, and it can issue its own token. So essentially, that becomes its independent entity, if you will.
Yeah, and it also means, given the decentralized nature of it, people from across the world can contribute and also be rewarded for say that cafe in New York or whatever. Like, which is that we sort of glossed over, but that's never been really not a thing before. That's like very like you accessing different sort of markets only recently has become sort of more mainstream, but like it's still quite difficult, especially because of the legislation with certain things. So yeah, I think that's also very, very cool.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just, it's actually getting more, it's getting worse, right? Like now, a lot of the growth in robotics is happening in China and the US.
Mm,
And you can't invest, like Chinese investors can invest in the US and vice
yeah.
versa, right? So it's becoming segregated and it's inaccessible. But when you're a DAO, it's opens up a lot of doors that normally you wouldn't be able to have.
Mm. What is the role of your Deuce token?
Yeah, so the Davis token, we use a V token model, similar. We're inspired by Curve. So essentially, you have to stake the publicly traded Davis token to get governance rights, which basically the longer you stake, it grows over time. To be able to get these voting rights, proposal access, and also be able to approve these different sub DAOs. Sorry. So essentially, you're governing that treasury of assets as well. So let's say we've had all these different assets we spoke about, can essentially vote on exits, for example. Like we've had an allocation in Aptronic, let's say, and maybe they're going into IPO and there's a possibility to exit. We can govern and decide collectively on how to, how to liquidate that asset at a given point in time. Also, if it's a token investment, also how we do that. Let's say we had a SAFT investment in an early stage DeFi protocol, we can decide on what we're doing with that, how to redistribute the revenue, and essentially you can kind of vote on these things like profits from the machines, exit, launchpad fees, etc. It all flows back to the DAO, to the profits, and then essentially we choose what we could do with that. So this could be there's three different things you could do. You could just go back into the treasury, grow the treasury by default, grows the market cap. Then secondly, it could be token buybacks and burns, for example, or we can create staking programs. So this X Deus, we call it, instead of V token, we call it X Deus. So it's the V token model, but we can do staking programs, which essentially allows us to bring some of that value back to people staking and governing and contribute to the DAO. So essentially redistributing a lot of the value coming in from the physical AI assets that we're holding back to the token holders. So essentially it just governs everything happening within that, including the value that's being generated, what we do with that, and how we basically operate and grow the ecosystem long term.
Very cool. And how can people get involved with XMAQUINA and your DAO?
So actually, if somebody wants to get involved right now, we have our upcoming Genesis auction on April 29th. And this is essentially the way we see the DAO. So we've already had our first Genesis auction, which was sold out just over a month ago, maybe a month and a half ago. And this will be our second auction where people can contribute tokens. This next auction will be specifically in USDC. And in return, they get the Deus token. So essentially, you're seeding the DAO. The funds go into the DAO's treasury. You get back the governance token to then basically govern and start making these allocations across the different physical AI space. And that is, happening soon. You can always also just join our Discord, learn more. We have the team's always active in there, growing communities. So that's what's coming next.
I want to ask in terms of XMAQUINA and where it sort of fits into the future of. So where do you think? I guess the best way of asking this is, where do you think the future of DePIN and DPay is going? And with that wave, with that shift, where does XMAQUINA play a role in that?
Yeah, so I'm really optimistic about the future of DePIN and DePi. I think DePi is just like a subordinate or subsector to DePIN, and I think it's still early stage, but we're seeing a lot of projects successfully implement these models and really validate the data that they're producing and monetize it. Like a good example is GeoNet. I think we'll continue to see more and more of that over the coming years. And I think the space is really going to grow into a full machine economy. For DePi, I think it's also very new, but there's tons of opportunity here. I think data for physical AI is going to be crucial for like robotics and humanoids to really become efficient. This DePIN model and token incentivized networks are perfect for this. So I think there's really interesting projects coming out and working on this as well that we've been speaking to. I think it's just going to grow. I think we'll have learning curves. We'll see a lot of trial and error, but overall, long term, we're going to see more and more success stories, and we'll continue to bring value to the crypto space, and people will start to realize that this is for real, and that the machine economy is something that needs to be decentralized, and it only makes sense for machines, robots, and these agents to interact and transact with one another through cryptocurrencies. Might be a stable coin, but it doesn't really make sense to be transacting on the old financial rails. It just doesn't, it's not efficient enough. And I think it's really the only way forward. So the future is definitely bright for this space.
Yeah, I completely agree with your, like, I guess your payment side of things, because I think if crypto wasn't invented by now, I think it would have been invented specifically for this use case, because you're right, like the existing rails aren't fast enough, and cross borders as well. There's just a lot of basically legacy issues that exist with this sort of the payment and the value exchange layers of today, and crypto basically resolves almost all of them. Especially when you bring in sort of stablecoin into the mix, it's like it makes a ton of sense. And they have to have a way of exchanging value between different robots and different sort of agents. So that compatibility is very important. So I completely agree. I think that would have happened regardless if crypto wasn't invented by now. Mauricio, we're going to get to the end of the podcast now. So a question I like to ask all my guests before we wrap up the podcast is, what is your favorite use case of DePIN or DPay outside of what you guys are immediately doing?
Yeah, so I guess I'll jump back on what I was talking about. So I think the crowdsourcing of data for humanoid robots, I think that's what's really been interesting me the most. Yeah, and there's a really cool project working on it called Reborn. So they're really cool. If you haven't checked them out, do so. And essentially, yeah, they're creating a system. So they started beforehand. So they started with using these sensors, and I think they use meta glasses as well. They first started to incentivizing people to do these because they would be able to then control their avatars, right? Like their online avatars. So then they started creating this big pool of human data, creating real world movements, doing real things, picking things up, moving things, opening doors, etc. And now they're diving deep into robotics. I think they're already working with some robotics companies to get that data basically authenticated, verified, and proven that it's something that they need, and refining that to make sure the data sets are clean enough and so on for these robots. But essentially, this is a perfect use case, and I'm really bullish on the crowdsourcing of data using DePIN to allow machines and robots to learn quicker.
Yeah, that's a really good example, and I think that's one area that's maybe not it's probably not as sexy as the other areas of DePIN when it comes to like data collection. That's what I'm talking about, but it's so valuable, and it makes data collection far more scalable than the sort of current solutions that exist, especially when it comes to like location mapping and things like that, which are essential for things like autonomous vehicles and humanoid robots, as you said. So yeah, completely agree. And there's a ton of value that will accelerate innovation so much. So yeah, thank you so much for your time, Mauricio. It's been such a pleasure having you on the podcast. Last question from me. I think you kind of already answered it, but how can people stay in touch with you and get involved in XMAQUINA?
Yeah, so just you could visit our website at xmachina.io. You can also follow us on Twitter at xmachina.dao. Yeah, our auction is coming up on April 29th, and we just started a DePi community as well on Twitter. So it's basically an open community, so anybody could share all these updates. The space is really growing. So yeah, you can join that community, share updates, latest in robotics, crypto, and that conversion. And yeah, looking forward to growing the space together with you guys as well. Thanks a lot for having me. It's been a great chat.
Been an absolute pleasure from my side as well. Thank you so much for coming on again, Mauricio. And yeah, I'm sure we'll chat very soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's discussion, brought to you by the embedded blockchain Minima, the only layer 1 blockchain lean and compact enough to run a full node on chip or on any mobile IoT device. If you're new to DePIN, subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Twitter to stay up to date. Thank you so much for watching again, and we'll catch you in the next episode.